So on that note, if the school board comes to us and wants us to help them with affordable workforce housing for just teachers, are we going to have every law enforcement agency come in and saying we want affordable housing for just law enforcement? And I kind of foresee that is going to kind of happen. And so that's why I think this directory is so important. But the question I had is, are we working with those industries? Law enforcement, fire departments, the school board directly, so that, because they need to have housing to recruit new teachers to come here. We have to have housing to recruit law enforcement officers and fire officers to come here. So I know we're going to do this directory and this way to find it, but I think there should be a direct connection, a direct communication link, just like Jabil is doing it, on their own. We need to be doing that for the same thing. Otherwise, we're going to be building silos for each little individual industry.
Right.
And I just don't know that that's maybe the best path to be going. So,
Well, we've heard that that the school board's gonna come to us. We haven't seen that application. It's a good question.
Right.
But I want to remind, we respond to people that are proposing doing developments. We do not have the staff or geared up to be able to manage developments. And so, we're responsive in that. It would be a different approach if we went out and started trying to recruit to do developments like that, because we can't do that. We're not set up to do that. If you want us to do that, it would just be a very different approach. We'd have to gear up, staff up, to be able to take that type of an approach. And that makes it hard because, the question we had is, why aren't there developments in North County and Tarpon Springs or wherever? And it's because we're reacting to people that are proposed. What we did do is hire contract staff to go out and talk to the development community and trying to get them to participate in our affordable housing program. And so we've tried to encourage more developers that are building. I mean, you go up and down 19 and you see thousands of units and none of them have any affordability to it. It was a missed opportunity, I believe. And so we're trying to reach out and say, work with us, incorporate some of that, and we have these funding sources available. But we're not building, units. And so I just wanted to remind that, because it's not going to be consistent because we're reacting to proposals.
and that makes a lot of sense. But I guess if we're doing workforce housing, and my question when I posed to you is, how do we know, once we give them the money and they open up, how do we know what they're doing? How do we know that they're giving workforce housing? And after they do their first year lease, are they 4 years later still doing, how do we know? Is there accountability on checking up on that?
Yeah.
And I just think that if there's a link up, and this directory and this kind of thing that you're talking about, but you have a direct link up in which workforce, because we're saying this is workforce housing, that workforce has a way to connect. How do we know the hospitality industry is connected up so that when they need their groundskeepers and their housekeepers and stuff, that they're connected up to this kind of, we're spending all this money on it, but how do we know that they're not working with these industries to make sure that they're going in there? And where's the accountability to make sure that 4 years later, they're still doing what they said they were going to do?
And they
so
monitor those.
So I do know that this directly should help. At least there's a place to go to and say, all right, here's some units. We want to hire some folks. There's units here. Here's who you contact to get your housing. I think that's a huge step. But I just want to make sure there's accountability on whatever it is that we're doing.
And Evan, you monitor those yearly, correct?
Yeah, so our community development side, that's part of any agreement that would have about setting aside a unit that they're, and I believe sometimes it's a private firm. I know Bruce can speak to it, but there is a required monitoring that's ongoing with
Okay.
anybody who has an
Yeah,
agreement
I'm
with
just
us.
curious where they're getting the people. Are they getting them from out of other counties, or are they getting it from our workforce industry? Where do they get the people that are going to be staying in those workforce housing or affordable housing?
And I can't answer that question in terms of who's being housed in those units from where they lived before that unit or what their occupation is necessarily. The restrictions that are put in place are for income. So we go out on an annual basis and monitor to make sure that they have files for the minimum number of units, and we look at the income documentation of those applicants to make sure that they meet that requirement. So, those restrictions do not place a restriction on a type of job or any other thing other than income. So we're monitoring that income requirement on an annual basis, but all the programs that we administer do not have a job preference, priority, or limitation to an occupation.
To your point, Commissioner, as we get this website built out, we certainly can market that and talk to our hospitality industry, talk to any of the areas that you just referred to, and make sure they know that this is available at least.
Okay,
So
because we
can do
are
a better
selling this as workforce housing, but it's not a workforce potential. We're not collecting that workforce information. So we don't know if we're providing more workforce housing for any one industry, because we're not collecting that data, right? But we're selling this as workforce housing. So when I say, no, we're not doing affordable housing, what people think, Section 8, we're doing workforce housing to ensure that people can afford, we can recruit good people. And so I think if we're going to be doing workforce housing, we should be collecting the data on workforce.
What they do for income, so it
But I
has
do
to
for
meet that
income.
criteria.
I get that, but I guess if we're doing it for income and we're saying it's for workforce, and then let's say someone says, okay, well, we're doing this for workforce, how many, have we been able to recruit teachers because we're doing workforce housing? Have we been able to ensure the hospitality industry has the workforce that they need because we're doing workforce housing? And there's no data being collected based on workforce, and we're saying that we're doing workforce, and so is there a way that we can collect data that at least says, not just income, I get how it's income, but if we're doing true workforce, and we want to recruit new police officers to go into the police, that industry or whatever it is, should we not have some kind of data set or data point about the workforce?
What you mean, what type of jobs people have that are in those particular
Yeah,
units?
I mean, if we're doing workforce housing, then I think we should have some data point on what the workforce.
I defer to staff of whether they can collect that type of information. But remember, we also have to remember that if you look at the numbers, the number of units compared to any industry is low. I mean, the number of units we're able to incentivize is still a fraction, of the numbers. And if you broke that down, I certainly would not advise us to get into trying to set aside units for hospitality, police officers, teachers. I mean, that would be a nightmare to manage. And somebody would have to step forward and manage that. So if the school board wants to do that, well then, obviously, you could set that up, but it'd be on them to manage that. I mean, somebody's got to be able to manage that front-end process. And it would be, if you went by jurisdiction, that's a lot of different people. But I defer to them. I mean, if they can collect that type of information, it'd be good data points. But it'd be very, very hard for us to get in and try to satisfy any particular industry. We're having a hard enough time just getting affordable units advanced. And we've worked really hard. I mean, we put a lot of resources into hiring people to go out and talk to developers and say, rather than just build this unit, set aside a few dollars to make some affordable, either workforce or affordable. And by the way, we can incentivize that. And here's some other types of finance programs that are available to help with that cost because, like we've seen, they know that they can run them out at market rate. And so, any extra layer of complexity to it makes it harder to attract them to participate.
Okay, well, then maybe we ought to be defining on our workforce, because if we're just using the term to satisfy people's perception, I just think we should be collecting some kind of data set. If we're going to be terming it workforce, then I think we should be collecting something. Otherwise, you just change the name and it's strictly affordable, it's strictly based on income, which is definitely what you're telling me. And so then I have trouble with this calling it workforce if it's not based on some kind of job creation, which I assume it is. If they can afford to live there, they can afford their job more, I get it. But I just think that if we're going to use the term workforce, then we should be collecting a data point.
Even entry level into our white collar jobs, there's a huge gap and